Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, 5 great authors I haven't talked about on the channel before. So let me preface this by saying these are 5 great authors who I don't think I've talked about on the channel, or at least who I haven't talked about very much at all. I may have mentioned them in passing. I think a book by one of the authors did turn up in my 10 really long books I need to read someday video, and I've probably featured a few of them in like book haul and library tour videos, but I don't think I've ever talked in depth about any of them. It's difficult though coming up with authors I hadn't talked about. So the inspiration for this video was a message someone sent me, I think it was on Blue Sky, might have been Thread, saying, have you ever read this author? I've never heard you talk about them on the channel. And it's an author who I have read and who has made it into this video. But because I read their books before I started doing the channel, and because they're not horror books, and most of my kind of top 10 style videos have been focused on the horror genre, they're not an author I've talked about. So I thought it'd be interesting to do a video with 5 authors who I really, really like, who I haven't really talked about. And these are all authors, well, at least 2 of them, I think I've exhausted all of the books of the type that I enjoy by them. But the other ones, there are, definitely other books by them that I would like to read and maybe we'll read in the future. Right, let me get on with the video then. So, the first author is actually an author of non-fiction. So he writes military history books, and that is Ben MacIntyre. So he's a British writer and I think journalist as well, who's written a load of really interesting but crucially really entertaining non-fiction books. Typically about the Second World War, but they're not all about the Second World War. Some of them are about the Cold War as well. And his books are they're really engrossing, really fascinating. He packs them with like interesting detail, but also kind of makes them human as well. So you form a connection with the people he's writing about. I think he's really, really great. So the ones I've read by him are Agent Zigzag, which is about a guy who was during the Second World War was a spy, but he was like he was a double agent and indeed a triple agent. So it gets very, very complicated. And some of the things he was involved in are quite ludicrous, but the book is hugely entertaining. I've also read Operation Mincemeat, which was about a plot with some Allied forces in Germany and France before D-Day, kind of setting things up for D-Day, which again was really fascinating and just a different view of a pivotal event in 20th century history. And then the other one I've read was about Kim Philby, who was a British spy who spied for the Russians. That was Spy Among Friends, which was really, really interesting and really kind of dug into Philby's life a bit. So yeah, Ben MacIntyre, if you like that kind of thing, I think is a really excellent writer, a very engaging military history. Next one is someone completely different. So someone who only wrote 4 books. He died very young. He was only 37 when he died, and that is Nathaniel West. So Nathaniel West was a guy who wrote 3 kind of quite weird experimental type books, and then like none of those sold at all. Basically, this was in I think the 30s. None of them sold. He was American. He ended up working in the movie industry, like helping out. I don't know if he actually like wrote screenplays or if he was more like a script doctor, but ended up working in the movie industry. And his most famous book is his final book, Day of the Locust, which was filmed in I think the 70s, which is based on his experiences as a screenwriter. But the books by him, I'm actually not a huge fan of Day of the Locust. I think it's okay, but I prefer his earlier, weirder books. In particular, A Cool Million, or The Dismantling of Lemuel Pitkin, as the subtitle is, which is about this guy who is trying to like live the American dream, basically trying to make money in America, and ends up gradually losing body parts as the book progresses. And then Miss Lonely Hearts, which is about someone who's like an agony aunt, and just kind of delves into human misery a bit, that book, but again really, really fascinating. The other one he wrote is The Dream Life of Balso Snell, which is just really weird, like a really weird surreal adventure. But yeah, I think Nathaniel West is a really interesting writer. I discovered him as when I think it was either in my late teens or early 20s, when I was quite into this kind of experimental type fiction, but he's a writer who's really stuck with me since then. Next up, probably the most well-known author on this list, but well-known for writing a particular kind of book. And whilst I love that particular kind of book he writes, it's the other books he's written which I really, really love. So that author is Roald Dahl. So obviously best known as a children's writer for writing things like the BFG and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach. You know, a much-loved children's author. You know, I read his books as a kid. My daughter read his books as a kid. So, yeah, really, really well known for his children's books. But also wrote short horror fiction, and his short horror fiction is excellent. So this is something that was kind of reasonably well known in the UK, at least in the 70s, because there was a long-running TV series called Tales of the Unexpected based on his short stories. But I think, you know, people nowadays really just remember him as a children's writer. But his short horror fiction is great. In particular, one of his stories called Man from the South has a lot of his stories have that kind of like really nasty twist ending, a bit like the EC horror comics have, where right at the end of the book something happens which, or at the end of the story something happens which kind of flips your understanding of what's been going on. And you know, the nasty people in Roald Dahl's short stories, and there often are nasty people, often come to sticky ends. Man from the South is one that's just really stuck with me because of that twist ending. It still sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it. It's really horrible and creepy. So if you've never read Roald Dahl's horror fiction and you are a fan of short horror fiction, definitely check him out. Next up then, and this is the author who I think had a book in my 10 really long books I need to read someday. That book was The Pillars of the Earth. The author is Ken Follett. So he's become, like Roald Dahl has become really well known for children's fiction, Follett has become really well known for writing these huge historical, like, epics, basically, you know, 1,000-page books that often are in series. That's what he's best known for nowadays, and when you see him talked about on YouTube, that tends to be what people are talking about. But he started out writing thrillers, and he's written some really great World War II thrillers in particular that I've thoroughly enjoyed. So Eye of the Needle, Hornet Flight, Jackdaws, which is a great one, which is about kind of female espionage agents, and Night Over Water, which is, I think, another kind of aviation themed one like Hornet Flight was. But yeah, just really enjoyable, engrossing thrillers. He's just a really good natural storyteller, and I think that's why he's had such success with these, you know, huge books. When you're writing huge books, I think you have to be a good storyteller to keep the reader wanting to turn the pages. I think someone said in a comment the other day that that one of like Ken Follett's sayings is he likes the story to turn every 5 or 6 pages. It was something like that, and you definitely get that with his books. You know, they are constant. The plot is constantly progressing. The characters are engaging, and you come to care for them. But the main thing is that kind of thundering plot that runs through them, where you just want to keep on turning the pages to find out what happens next. And the final author is the so far unnamed author who inspired this whole list, and that is Patricia Cornwell. So Patricia Cornwell, a really good crime writer. I started reading her stuff in the 90s. I think I probably read her first book not long after it came out. That was Post Mortem. She ended up getting embroiled in a couple of scandals more recently. She wrote a book about Jack the Ripper, which I think a lot of people felt was not terribly well thought through, and there was some kind of relationship scandal she was involved in as well, I think. But yeah, her early crime novels, which are about a forensic, what's the word for a forensic person? A forensic pathologist, I guess, called Kay Scarpetta, are really, really great. So packed with really gruesome forensic detail, as you know, autopsies are undertaken on the victims of the crimes that are being investigated. But Scarpetta, I always found a really engrossing central character. And these were books that, you know, at the time you didn't see much like that. I think Karen Slaughter, who has similar kind of characters in some of her series, I think she came a little bit later than Patricia Cornwell. I certainly don't remember reading anything like those Patricia Cornwell books at the time. But yeah, she was kind of a bit of a breath of fresh air, I think, in the crime genre at the time. She shook things up a bit. So yeah, really solid like mystery thrillers, but yeah, with lots of really gruesome forensic detail as well, which, you know, can be really fascinating to read. I think it's interesting. I'm someone who's fascinated by the idea of people solving crimes, solving mysteries, and having that different kind of scientific angle on it was something I always really enjoyed. So there you go, 5 great authors who I don't think I've talked about much on the channel before. Let me know what you think of my list. Let me know if you're fans of any of these authors. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.